Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 107. I am Bon Diesel, and this is my podcast about The Division 2, its community, news, speculation, and updates. Like I said, I am Bon Diesel. I do Division stuff such as this podcast, supposedly Twitch streams, YouTube videos, and other things about Division 2. Today, we will have a State of the Game recap. We'll talk about some Division 2 news and speculation, some community topics, listener questions, and content updates. I would like to thank our Patreon supporters for this month: Benny, Hassan, Christian, Darren, Dale, Tony, Justin, Jimmy, Tim, PK, and DJ. Your support is very much appreciated and has definitely helped me continue being able to do this podcast and such. If you'd like to support the podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. Okay, State of the Game recap. Today we had Hamish, Bruce, and Chris talking about Title Update 9, which released on the 21st of April. They talked a lot about various bug fixes and things that happened, such as how Title Update 9 changed everyone's striker knee pads into level 1 gear. So that has been fixed with a hot patch, but there is a bunch of other stuff as well. If you want the full patch notes, you are going to need to check out the forums. The big topic, if anyone pays attention to the social media of this game, was obviously going to be the M18 Nerf that was not announced. People figured out that it basically took down the damage 40%. So what they said here was that it was essentially a mistake, that they are working on a balancing patch that will include the M1A, but that this nerf wasn't on purpose, and that's why it wasn't in the patch notes. I guess at first Chris kind of made it sound like he forgot to put it on, and then Bruce kind of made it sound like they didn't actually mean for it to be in there. We'll talk about that after I go through these notes, but I don't know. They are going to reverse the change for PvE, so the M1A will work the same as it did before for PvE. For PvP, they're going to retain 20% of the nerf, because supposedly there's people who like the nerf. A part of me doesn't know why they aren't just going to keep it 40, but I don't know things. So they're kind of keeping the nerf for PvP. They talked a bit about how there's a long-term balancing pass being worked on that they hope can be out probably around June, but the work from home situation is hindering work a lot. I think what people need to realize about the work from home, because I'm experiencing it myself, I can, and they, I assume, can basically do everything they need to do. The problem comes with the communication with other people, and the fact that I have to just assume that there's like 50 different groups of people working on this game, teams of 3 or 4 or 5 people, maybe more, who all have to coordinate, which when they're in an office across the hallway from each other is relatively easy. When they're all at their own homes, is significantly harder. They did talk about the raid in Title Update 9. Now, if you go to the raid screen, it shows both raids, and they're still expecting it to come out in the spring time frame, but they did not give a specific date quite yet. There was a lot more balance talk as well. They also mentioned that Stadia apparently has some kind of issue with its UI, and that's a different platform of the game. If you didn't know, Stadia is a Linux-based platform, which, at least as far as I know, most AAA games don't work on Linux. Most games in general don't. They have because they have to make a whole separate game, kind of like how they had to used to make a different port for, like, well, even now Nintendo Switch compared to Xbox. You can't run the same game on both. So that's how Stadia is as well. which means that someone had to spend time and development money to make Division 2 work on Stadia. So I made the joke on Twitter, for the 6 people who are playing Division 2 on Stadia, they're going to be behind on updates. This isn't surprising. Games like, I think, like Borderlands and Destiny are like way behind on patches. Destiny may not be, but the big difference is that Division 2 is crossplay. So people on Stadia can play with people on PC. So I don't really know how them being behind on patches and stuff affects the game, but I suspect there's so few people it doesn't matter. As for the other things they talked about during the state of the game, I'm gonna be straight up, I got pretty bored and I was a little distracted with my daughter and some other stuff that was going on, and so if you want to catch the last 10-20 minutes and see what they talked about, they went into some more detail, but if I have to be totally honest, I kind of lost track. So this state of the game, this game, and I think any game, and really any information giving body, has such a tough job in deciding when and what, when to say things and what to say. And the issue with this is kind of what I mentioned before. Maybe I misheard, so don't take my word for it. Listen for yourself. But it kind of seems like Chris came out and said like, oh, I forgot to put this change on the patch notes. But then it kind of seemed like they're like, oh, but this wasn't supposed to be in the patch. So if you forgot to put it in the patch notes, then it was intended to be in this patch, or it wasn't. And I guess I'm just confused by that. So I don't know if he's saying that like it wasn't supposed to be in the game yet, but if it was, then I forgot and whoops. Like I don't know. The thing about this game and the people at Massive and Ubisoft is I have never had a bad experience basically with any of them, especially when I've gotten to meet a lot of them either at E3 or last year at the event in San Francisco I got to go to. These people are really, really cool. I've gotten to meet Yannick a couple times. I've gotten to meet, I got to meet Frederick, who's no longer on the game, but I've gotten to meet multiple people. Even Julian, I've gotten to meet him a couple times. And these guys are all, and these girls, all the people who work on this game seem great. That said, it just, ever since the first game and still now today, there just seems to be such an issue with just the communication, transparency. The CM specifically, Hamish and Chris, these other, whoever else is still on the CM team, I kind of don't. Shauna, that guy in North Carolina who I don't think follows anyone. I don't, and I'm not talking Amper. Amper's obviously gone. Whoever they are, they're obviously only allowed to say so much. And Hamish isn't even technically a CM. He has a different position, but it's still part of his role. And I'm sure that Hamish would love to say, hey, look, here's everything I know. Because I'm sure he and everyone who shows up on these State of the Games knows more than they're allowed to tell. But the problem with dealing with a giant corporation is there's people who probably aren't even at Massive, who are probably at Ubisoft Paris, who decide what they can and can't talk about and how they can talk about it. I've seen people compare it to a game like Warframe a lot, but Digital Extremes is owned by no one. They are their own dev. They are independent, and I think they even publish the game themselves, which is rare. Not many companies publish their own game. At least they didn't used to. Now it's a little bit more common, but still not very. So I don't blame Hamish, I don't blame Chris, I don't blame Bruce, I don't blame any of the people's faces that we see. I don't blame them for this frustration. But unfortunately, they're still the face of this situation with this game. I mean, I'm kind of frustrated at this point even, and anyone who's probably still listening to this podcast knows I'm as big of a fanboy as anybody is, and I still am. But I'm bored. I talked a bit about the seasons, I think last week. It's cool, and I mean, I know that there's a new agent I can hunt in the manhunt. I kind of don't care. I'm gonna do it for sure, but okay. I mean, I'll get to it. I, you know, like I talked about last week, Red Storm being gone, someone like Frederick. I mean, at this point, I almost have I have very few people left, because people have either left the game, or the studios have left, or that they're doing other projects now. I mean, I even find that people I got to know 2-3 years ago who were involved with the game aren't anymore. And so my assumption is that they're being replaced and that there's new blood being brought in, which can be really good. But it's still kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say concerning, but it's definitely kind of nerve-wracking, I guess. Or we just don't know, like, where's this going, I guess. I just don't I don't think we know, like, what is in store for Division 2. After the mid-roll, I have some other stuff to talk about, but like, I think the problem with these communications is that they don't really do that good of a job of like quelling people's fears on current issues. And then there's still that underlying long-term, like, okay, so what's going on like 6 months from now? Or because this raid is going to come out, all the streamers who hate the game are going to come back and play it, or the ones who still play it and shit on it constantly are going to play, and they're going to love it, and it's going to be so great, and they're going to be happy with their viewer counts, and cool. And then 4 days later, they're all going to hate it again, and they'll be back to business, right? Which is fine. I mean, I'm basically done with that. I don't think I've watched someone stream this game or watched another Division 2 video in like 6 months or more. Unfortunately, I don't listen to any other podcasts because I know there's still a few who cover the game, but as far as I know, the only ones left other than me are like Ubisoft based, or Tom Clancy based, or they aren't even Division 2 focused. And I just I think that there's just this like kind of void going on right now, because on paper there's new content like every week, right? There's new apparel events, and there's new leagues, and there's the new manhunt target, and cool, like look at all this content. But it's not really. It's kind of what I said before. I kind of made a comment on Twitter that got a lot of attention, where I kind of said like, hey, these battle passes are cool as long as they come with like new and interesting content also. This battle pass this season is neat. I think I'm rehashing a little bit last week, but like, it's cool. It's neat. It's fun. There's always a ticker going off and a big explosion on screen, and hey, look at this thing that you did. But after a few hundred times, that loses its gusto. And so I think, I already find myself being like, sure, we have this target that's available now. There'll be another one in 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll have this final manhunt target, which I just assume is going to be another bounty once you earn it, which is fine, but it's not really that interesting. And then the raid, I guess, will come out, and that will, again, probably be the way it is now, where over the whole player base, maybe 5, maybe 10% of the player base will ever do it. So then it turns into like an almost DZ situation, which we'll talk about. We're like, yeah, there is this content there that's okay, but it's only appealing to this like minuscule part of the active player base. What's being done for the whole thing. Like Warlords was a really cool release that kind of the whole community could play for like a couple days. Apparently I got a good couple weeks out of it, but like, what's next other than that? And I know these State of the Games, they can only say what they can say, but I think that there may be times where not having State of the Games is better than having them, and them kind of being confusing on what's being said, and really maybe sometimes not really saying much at all. So there's that. Okay, let's do the mid-roll. Okay, so on some Division 2 topics, I'm going to invoke the name of this podcast and say, well, let's be honest. So I made a tweet, which, if I'm saying that on this podcast, that's typically a scary thing. So I have this thing where I've kind of stopped giving a damn what anyone thinks. So I'll just kind of tweet something on Twitter and say, hey, here's a thing I think. And then I'll mute that shit and not go back for like a day, and then go back and type a few replies and then delete them because I know it's not worth it. And then kind of see how it plays out. So I had a post on the 20th where I said there should have been a PvE DZ in the Division 2. Rotate the DZs daily between normal, occupied, and PvE. Give them all unique loot mechanics, in the PvE zone would be legendary difficulty with rogue and hunter spawn chances. And then I finished it with, I'd normally hide after saying this, but the people who I'm worried about all have me blocked. The last time I made a post like this, some of the super cool and still promoted by official people in the division that shouldn't be, personalities, said some pretty awful shit and just straight lied about me and some other things. And but luckily most of them have blocked me at this point, and I don't have to worry about them. So what was interesting was this PvE DZ thing has been brought up in the past. It was a topic I was actually against. I did not like the idea of that, especially in Division 1, because we just had the one DZ. So you would have people, just not in the playing pool anymore. When in Division 1, you could already, like, in the DZ, if you just wanted to farm, you could mostly avoid other players. And even if they found you, they'd kill you, you fast travel to a different checkpoint, and you could then continue farming if you wanted to. If you didn't want to fight people, you could, for the most part. But the reason I've kind of changed my mind is a couple things. I think in Division 2 it's a lot different because the DZs are so small that you kind of can't avoid people anymore, and I think that's the point, which is fine. And there's 3. So like, say you add this, you don't take away anything from anyone. People who like the occupied DZ, it's there. It's still there. Doesn't go away. It's still right there. The people who want the regular DZ, bam, still there, not taking anything away from you. And now the third DZ is this thing that, from this post, now obviously it only has 50 replies, 145 likes, got retweeted a few times. Let's see the stats on it. How many interactions they get? Impressions. It got 13,000 impressions. Not too bad. But out of the 50 responses, like 6 or 7 were like, oh no, I don't want that, or like calling me a cuck or whatever. But the most of them were like, yeah. And even a few people seemed like they were in my boat, were like, I don't know, I hated this idea, but actually now. And the biggest response I got, like, negatively is like, oh, this game's already 95% PvE, why not just add more? I was like, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, absolutely. And so from this, like, let's be honest segment, I think I kind of just want to throw out some things that I'm thinking about the game, some broad things. The first one being the PvE DZ, and kind of discuss, are there some things in this game that should be added that previously people didn't want? Or are there some things that should just be like given up on? So one of the categories I would say is the PvE DZ. I wish it would have been there from launch at this point, because here's the thing. The biggest response is, well, you have the whole LZ. Why do you need one of the DZs as well? But what I specifically am asking for is something you can't get in the DZ. It's legendary difficulty, which you can only get in certain missions. You can't get it in the LZ. It's throwing some mechanics. Shit, I'm not a genius. I don't know how to design games, but I'm sure someone smart could come up with some unique twist on it. Give it some unique loot, some unique stuff in it, and then when you extract, you get attacked by, like, say you always get attacked by rogue agents. The way it is in missions right now, but they're going to be legendary, so they're going to whoop your ass, especially if you're in there on your own. And so, yeah, say, two of them spawn and come after you and try to take your gear. See, that's the thing. So, you get some decent loot, you get some stuff you want to extract, you like what you've got that knee pad that you really needed. You go, you shoot the flare. Okay, the 2 rogues are going to show up. And then they do, and then they kick your ass. And they take your gear. It doesn't drop. You can't go back and pick it up and then extract it. It's gone. You can't find them again and kill them. No, it's just gone. And that's the way it goes. If anything, you could throw in some survival elements into it. So every time, most of the response I got was, we already have this. And my response is, no, we don't. That's false. And then there's just a lot of people who just hate the idea of it, which is fine. There's no conversation to happen there. They just don't like it. Okay, good day, see ya. And then even there was a response of, well, I like the DZ now. Okay, cool. You can still do it. You may have to wait till tomorrow to do the DZ you prefer, but it's still all there. Doesn't take away anything from anyone. And I think what will probably be the second most controversial thing, I think that is kind of like a let's be honest moment. The first most controversial will be the last one, so just wait for that. But I think the second most controversial idea I have is that I think, much like in the lore of the game, the DZ is a failed experiment. And what I think that comes from is when they were promoting the first game, it had a 3-year promotion cycle, basically. In 2013, they debuted. The game came out in 2016. Probably should have come out in 17. Anyways, if you go back and look at those trailers, there was a lot about Division 1 and its advertising that made it look like it was going to be one thing, and then it wasn't. Obviously, in hindsight, one of the biggest things that people ripped on the game back then was its graphics. Now, I would still argue pretty heavily with most people that I still think Division 1 is a gorgeous game, and it wasn't obviously as cinematic and filled out and beautiful as the trailers originally portrayed the gameplay. Even games today can't really do what they showed in that first trailer, the gameplay trailer. Maybe the next gen games, but we'll have to see. But the other thing that got pushed really hard was this idea of this dark zone. It sounds so ominous, right? And it was this idea in the trailer. The gameplay trailer was, you have 3 of your friends. You're all 4 of you running through. You get some gear, you kill some enemies, some AI, and you loot up, you get some cool loot, and then you pop the flare to extract the gear because it's contaminated. And the other team shows up, and you take them out because they're here. They're rogues. They're here to take away your gear. They decided that they want to fight you, even though they don't have to. And it's so cool. And then the last second, at the end of the trailer, one of the members of the group goes rogue. That's such a cool concept, right? And what I think is a problem is that from an actual game mechanic point of view, those situations just don't work, right? The DZ is a thing that ever since the first game and even today, and maybe just this game in general, and maybe all games, is, and I've talked about this concept before, that if the however many millions of people who bought Division 2, if they all played the game the way that they're quote unquote supposed to, then it's a perfect game, because everyone does everything the way it was designed to be done, right? The missions get played the certain way, the end game gets played the way they want, you do everything the way that the engineer said they wanted you to do it, and therefore you love it. Problem is that that's not how humans work. And the best example I have is, if you're a civil engineer and there's a new sidewalk that has to go in a new neighborhood, but in the sidewalk in the middle of where it's supposed to go, there's a tree. So the engineer will design the sidewalk and say how deep it needs to be, how wide, how far away from the road, all of that fun stuff. And when that sidewalk gets to the tree, the engineer will design a nice little curve in the sidewalk, you know, a nice little arch, and it'll go around the tree, and it'll still look nice, it'll fit with everything, and then it, you know, the tree isn't a problem. They don't have to remove the tree. Say it's an endangered tree, it can't be removed. So they put it in the sidewalk, but if you go back there a year later, what you're gonna find is you're gonna have a sidewalk, and you're gonna have a tree, and you're gonna have this sidewalk that goes around the tree. But then between the two straight parts of the sidewalk and right on top of the tree, you're gonna see a trail walked through the grass, and the grass will be worn away where the people walked, and they took the shortcut. You know, the people see the sidewalk, they're supposed to walk around it, maybe some do, but other people are just gonna walk straight. They're just gonna walk, you know, right beside the tree and not do what they're supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to do. And I think that's how games are. I think that these developers and designers, and they think like, well, I'm going to design this mechanic in this game, Division 2 being a good example, and that's how people are going to use it. And then they don't, because that's not how people are. People are lazy. People are efficient. Lazy is a bad word. People like to be efficient. We see this with the M1A situation. It's not the most fun way to play a game, but it's definitely the easiest. So that's why people are doing it. And that's why they get super mad when it gets taken away, especially when they aren't told about it. And I think the DZ is another example of that. The DZ, and this is what originally set people off on me like a year ago, is the DZ isn't supposed to be a PvP zone. Even though that's what some of the quote-unquote PvP hardcore 360 no scope 420 smoke every day people think it is. It's a farming zone. It's a place to get gear, where you might fight people. You'll definitely fight AI, and you might have to fight other people, or maybe you'll help them. See, that's the thing, is that it's supposed to be this idea that you're going in, you're hitting landmarks, you're fighting random groups, whatever, you're accomplishing tasks, and there's a chance that someone could roll up, or a group of people could roll up and be like, you know what, I want to take what they have. And they flag rogue and they kill you and they take your stuff, and then you respawn and try to go get your stuff back. Like, that's the idea. The problem is that there's a lot of people, and it seems like the majority of people who are the most vocal about it, that's not, they don't care, or they don't like, or whatever the goal of the DZ. Their goal is different, and their goal is to just, they want it to be a PvP zone. I want to go 4v20 again, like in Division 1, as if that was the point of Division 1's DZ, which it wasn't. that wasn't, you know, they didn't design Division 1's DZ for people to stand around doing emotes until one group decides to go rogue, and then everyone melts them. They didn't design the DZ 1 or 2 for people to stand at checkpoints and kill people until they're on manhunt, and then run away into a corner or on top of a rope, and to just kill people until they get bored and then they lose their manhunt status. Like, that isn't what either game was for. And while people obviously had fun doing those things, that doesn't mean that that's the point, or that was even good. A big argument I've made about the DZ and PvP and Division is you can have fun with it and it's still bad. And that's a concept I think that a lot of people either can't wrap their brains around, or they just don't care about, is that there's a difference between like good mechanically designed gameplay, and especially in PvP, and fun. Absolute trash tier hot shit messes of games can be fun, but they're not good, right? And I think that's kind of where I stand when it comes to like the Division PvP, and I did even back, you know, when I used to play a lot more of it, more so in Division 1, less so now. But I still think that people, they kind of lose that sense of like, but I had fun. And the reason I stand behind that pretty well is I don't know many of these people. There's not many people who play solo who think the DZ is fun. And I've had people tell me like, oh, well, the DZ with a group is pretty fun. But the thing is about groups is that Anthem in a group is fun. Fallout 76 in a group is probably fun. Almost anything that you can do with your friends or with other people is fun, even if the actual activity sucks. And I think that's just kind of a point that gets lost a little bit. So yeah, I think the DZ in general, and this is something I'll talk about in the next segment, I think the DZ at some point has to just be accepted that, one, the developers obviously have a different idea of what they want the DZ to be than at least some of the players. And the thing about the DZ in general is that even if the DZ is quote unquote perfect, say they design it very well, I still think the number of people who are interested in that kind of gameplay is really small. It's something like the PvE DZ argument as well. Say they implement a PvE DZ, or say they fix the DZ. It's not like there's anyone right now who would go into like a PvE DZ who is currently like in the regular DZ. So it's not like you're going to take anything away from people who already like the DZ. If there's someone who likes going in there and killing other people and that tension, they're in there today. But what I'm getting at is that for like the PvE DZ, that would just open up more play opportunity for people who aren't interested in that thing. And then going back to the DZ in general, is I just don't think that even a really well-designed DZ even appeals to that much of the player base. And that's only really been reinforced by a lot of the responses I got on that Twitter post. And leading into that, the thing that I do think would appeal to a lot more people is conflict. You know, the skirmish mode in Division 1, when it came, I was like, oh crap, this is what I've really wanted. DZ, the kind of free-flowing gank fest, whatever that is, cool. People who like it, that's fine. But this skirmish thing, man, I love Call of Duty. I like Halo. I like shooter games where it's me and my buds against you and your buds, and we're going to see who can shoot better. And at the end of this, we'll know. Not this, you know, see who can abuse the mechanics better thing that I feel like you get in the DZ. But it never really went anywhere in Division 1. So then in Division 2, during the lead up, they were talking about conflict a lot, and I was like, oh damn, cool. Like they're finally, you know, we're getting like a conquest mode kind of, getting like a deathmatch mode. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted. And even since release, we've gotten this team elimination mode where it's a round based. It's almost like Rainbow Six Siege. But unfortunately, it really just it's gotten a few balancing passes. They took away the normalizing. And that's been about it. There's been no events. There's been no reason to go in there other than some stupid assignments. There's been no, like, there's just been nothing that's pushed people towards conflict. And I think conflict, what I was saying before about the DZ, where I think its potential player base is actually pretty small. I think the potential player base, or even to bring people into the game who aren't normally interested in it, is much higher with conflict. Because it's proven. I mean, you know, some of the most popular games are these round-based team deathmatch games. Now, that doesn't take away the fact that, you know, a game developer for another big company I talk to a lot pointed out, it's like, well, but the problem is with conflict is that it still exposes all of the issues with RPG PvP. You know, just the almost impossible challenge of balancing gear and all of those things, and which I don't disagree with. So I don't know. An idea that's been floated forever is that people just want like loadouts. I still don't like that because I think that takes away the whole point of Division, you know, of having your own gear. But I think having a better like normalizing system, straight up getting rid of some things in PvP situations, an idea that's been floated before that I'm actually kind of all in at this point is, you know, different gear for conflict in the DZ than the LZ. I had an idea before Division 2 even came out that I thought it would be cool if you're in the LZ, you're doing missions, you're doing bounties, you're doing whatever, you're killing stuff, and then you walk into a DZ checkpoint and your character takes off their LZ gear because it's not contaminated and has like a contaminated locker that they walk into, and they put on their DZ gear that's already contaminated, so they don't have to, mess up their good gear for the LZ, and they can have gear that's suited just for the DZ. And that would be a lore, that would be a way to use lore to explain why there's gear that can only be used in the DZ. And then you could balance that gear specifically. You could make sure it never had any skills on it, no talents, nothing that, is not for PvP or not for the DZ use. And then you could require people to use that same gear in conflict, say, and even normalize it perhaps. I love that idea at this point. If anything, I think it kind of makes sense from a lore perspective. Why should you wear the same gear in the LZ that you wear in the DZ if it can get contaminated, I just think that'd be one way to make conflict. And I mean, and conflict would just need so much more attention. It would need reasons to go in there. I think Destiny 2 does a good thing with its PvP. I haven't played much of it, so I would need someone who knows more about it. But from what I've looked into, is that people don't necessarily think it's like the best PvP in the world, but they do enjoy it overall, and they include it in the game as like a part of just playing the game. And they haven't tried to make it like perfect PvP, but they've just tried to make it fun, which conflict currently isn't to most people. Okay, and then the final thing to cut from Division in general would be the RPG element. And so hold on to your chairs. Don't recoil, don't give up on me yet. Don't unfollow. Excuse my stutters. Excuse my slurring, as a lovely review put it. But I think I've said it before. This is a thing I know will never happen. The Division is an RPG franchise. Fine. But what if it wasn't? The best example I have is what if they would have made the Division kind of like a spiritual successor to Ghost Recon Future Soldier, which I think it kind of is if you play both games. And you make it where, and I'm going to talk about this actually after this segment, but I just think that this game had potential as a quote-unquote realistic or more realistically based game, grounded game, because it tries to be. You're shooting real guns, you're using gear that's real, you're using, even the skills are based on things that are real and, may be real in laboratories that we will never see. The story isn't completely out of possibility. The things that happen, the characters in the game are all people that could exist, or all things that could happen. And then you have this magic element, right? That doesn't make any sense. It's explained by nano machines and stuff like that. And I just wonder, what if this game wouldn't have gone that way? Now, Ubisoft obviously has decided to make all of their games RPGs now, even freaking Ghost Recon. I won't get started on Wildlands and Breakpoint again. I'm not a fan of them. I don't like where Ubisoft Paris took that franchise. And I think it works sometimes. I think Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey are great. I think that those games fit the RPG element extremely well. I don't think Ghost Recon does. I don't think Far Cry does. If you were unfortunate enough to play Far Cry New Dawn, I don't, and it's not even a looter shooter. It's just like an RPG that they tried to kind of make it, and it's just a mess. It's so bad, because I really liked Far Cry 5. I thought it was great. It was a little weak. I think they should have been more controversial with it, but it was fun. And New Dawn wasn't at all. And I have no doubt that the what was that game called that got delayed? The London one. I'm not gonna remember it, but you know what I'm talking about. That got delayed. That's gonna be the same way. It's gonna be an RPG. Watch Dogs 3. that's going to be an RPG. I've even joked with people, kind of joking, but not really, that if they release another Splinter Cell game that everyone wants so bad, I bet it's an open world RPG game and people are going to hate it. It's probably just going to be Breakpoint with a new skin on it, because they keep trying to shove Sam Fisher into that franchise to make it relevant again, and it's just so cringy. Because Sam Fisher's fighting Terminators now, I guess. I don't know. I just I think maybe I would almost not be mad if, you know, hopefully Ubisoft pulls back on this push to make everything an RPG. And I sure wouldn't hate if Division was maybe one of their first tries at that. If they would, because you can still do the Division with not being an RPG. You can still have skills. You probably have to make them a little more realistic and not as like amazing and perfect. But you could still do it, and I think it could be really cool. But I'm sure many will disagree. Feel free to let me know. The other topic I have for today, I'm gonna save for next week, because I'm already running a bit longer than I expected to. And it's gonna be the Division 3. Why not speculate? So hold your pants for that one. After what I just talked about, it would be a little bit of repeating, so we'll talk about it next week, and I can think on it a little bit more. For community topics, I looked on Reddit and some other places, Twitter and so on. Some of the big ones I saw talking about the Apparel Caches, which to someone at least like me who hasn't really played that much is like useless at this point. I get these like keys and I have one item left. I have 99 out of 100 items, and so I just keep using these keys and getting credits that I can't use. I'm really surprised. I'm still really bummed about the way they handled apparel this time, because with Division 1, when you played through the first time, they had a bunch of kind of generic stuff, but you would have like a heavy coat in like 4 different colors, and then like a lighter coat, like a military coat in like 4 or 5 different colors. And they kind of gave you this base set of clothing where, like, 5, 10, 15 different shirts and pants and shoes and hats and stuff of like 4 or 5 different colors each. And then they started putting in cool stuff or different stuff. And with Division 2, they just went like full Fortnite with it. And just everything, especially at the beginning, it was so goofy. Flip-flops and Bahama shorts. And now some of the stuff they're giving out now is a little better. But I think what we really missed was they never gave us that like baseline of like, fairly basic graphic t-shirts and shorts and joggers and, hats. And we've got more ski caps than just like baseball caps in this game. It makes no sense. I promise you, in the middle of summer in Washington, D.C., no one in their right mind is wearing a ski cap, even if it's tucked up above their ears. So, yeah, the apparel has been a big bummer. I was really hoping that at some point they would maybe add items to the regular pool again that were just like fairly basic things that you could kind of like, you could wear some like regular shorts and tennis shoes with like one of the cool apparel t-shirts that you get from a drop or something. I don't know. But yeah, I definitely think that's been a big issue. The other one I'm like super into is the idea of mod organization. So right now there's no way to like organize things by the slot that they go in the mods, which makes like making sure that you don't have like 15 of the same thing for one mod slot, because it's pointless. And that's something I've been like, it's been killing me since the game came out almost, is that I wish there was a better way to organize that. Yeah, we'll save the rest of those for next week. Mick Short had 2 questions. If you have your own questions, feel free to ask in my Twitter, Discord, YouTube, wherever. Mick Short asked, would you rather own a Highland cow or a water buffalo? Well, I don't know what either one of those are, but the Highland cow sounds fancier, so we'll go with that. And then, what is you and Lady Bond's pizza as a couple? Well, today, I'm recording this on Wednesday, is our 10-year anniversary of dating. We've only been married about 3 years, but our pizza, well, she likes things I don't. So I'd say the one that we get along with the best is probably pepperoni and sausage. Okay, so to wrap this thing up, I do have another podcast that I have started. It's the Xbox Dadcast, where I'm talking about the Xbox Series X, any other news, speculation from a casual Xbox fan dad point of view. If you want to check it out, you can look up the Xbox Dadcast on all podcast providers. You can also check out the Twitter account for it. It's at Xbox Dadcast. Please take a moment to rate this podcast on whatever platform you are listening to it on. You can support the podcast and my other content by checking out patreon.com/theechocast. I am Bon Diesel on Twitch, where I promise I will eventually get back to streaming a few times a week. I'm also at Bon Diesel on Twitter. If you want some EchoCast or Bon Diesel merch, check out bondiesel.live/merch. That's all I have, so until next time.